Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's a beautiful day outside. So, hey, every day we have a choice, right? We have a choice to see things. Perspective can either be your power or your prison. So it's raining today. I mean, it's definitely going to rain for a little while, and it's going to rain all day. And the typical attitude towards rain and towards gloomy weather is it's gloomy, it's dark, it's dreary, it's wet, it's going to rain, it's going to wash out my plans. I mean, you have a choice. I can look at this rain and I can feel that way, or I can look at the rain out here and I can say, man, rain is cleansing. This is an opportunity for me to pause, reflect, to cleanse my soul, cleanse my mind. What if I went home today and decided I was just going to stand out in the rain and just feel the raindrops falling on me and washing away every bit of everything from the past, because I've got such a bright and amazing future ahead of me and I just want to focus on nothing but that. It's your perspective. My car is getting washed. There you go. It's exactly what I was saying driving this morning. I'm like, oh, my car's getting a little washed. I should throw a little soap on it. But that you have the perspective. That your perspective is either your power or your prison. So choose how you want to see the day, because the reality is it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to it, the meaning you associate to it. It's going to rain. Can you control the rain? No. Can you control what the weather's going to be like? Can you control what other people do? What are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on how everybody else did something to you, or how the rain is just dragging everything down for the day? Or are you going to focus on the positives that are there? What's wrong is always available, but so is what's right. It's whatever you choose to focus on. Email went out yesterday. We're going to do a contracts class. We're going to keep on the same theme. Last week we did everything but the blanks. Today we're going to do if this, then that, focusing on the blanks. But first, I just want to remind you all, I'm going to show you a brief video. This is what you can expect for today at 2 o'clock. We have a special guest, national trainer for Tony Robbins, Stephen Hilgart, will be presenting today at 2 o'clock. It's going to be on Zoom. So it's going to be at his Zoom link. If you register for the event, you'll get a link in your email and you'll be able to get to it. If you don't have it, shoot me a message. I will forward you the link. But this is what you can expect. It's a short 3-minute video, and then we're going to jump into our contract topic, and I'll post the link in the chat once this is done if you want to register. So take a look at what you can expect a little bit of today.
Hey everybody, Stephen Hilgart here, national trainer for Tony Robbins. I've got something really exciting for you here today, a behind the scenes video of what we actually do in these workshops that I can share with you. And my job for Tony is to help people bridge the gap from where they are to where they want to be in their personal lives, but also in their professional lives as well. And we do that by teaching 3 things. Number 1, specific strategies to make an increase in impact in your team's sales and productivity. Number 2, help people identify what are the limiting beliefs and psychologies that are stopping people from taking action. And number 3, creating this unshakable mindset, an emotional state that will help people show up consistently, not just once in a while, but we want people to show up at their best every single day. So I hope you're as excited for this as I am, and I can't wait to show you what we have. Success is 20% strategy, 80% psychology. That's why we're having this conversation tonight. And let me just ask you, if sales aren't going your way, inventory isn't going your way, taxes, president, weather, government, interest rates, if that stuff isn't going your way, what emotions tend to pop up? Frustration, stress, anxiety, worry, doubt, pissed off. Do we get that once in a while? Yeah. So we as leaders, we must learn how to control and manage our emotional state. And if you stay in your comfort zone for the next 6 months or 12 months, what are we going to experience? Loss of business, uncomfortability, right? That's really what it is. We experience, a lot of people tell me that it stays the same, but nothing in life stays the same. True? I mean, what happens to a plant? If it doesn't grow, what does it do? It dies. We as human beings, we do the same damn thing, right? We climb or we slide. In this room right now, you're aging like a fine wine or a stinky cheese. We gotta break out of our comfort zone occasionally so we can grow. We must learn how to get over those belief systems. You might have a belief about your past, a trauma, something that happened, and you can get rid of it in one session, but you got to get to listen. You have to have a plan for your business, for your personal life, for your relationships, for your health and fitness. If you don't have a plan, you're just going off in random directions. You know the saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That's why day 2, we spend a lot of time. Here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. What's my plan to bridge that gap? There's always someone who believes they can and always someone who believes they can't. Either way, you're right. We all know this, yes? Because here's the truth. No matter what the goal is, there's only one way to achieve it. You want to make more money, get in shape, better relationships. It's take massive, determined, what's the word? Action.
There's been a lot of talk lately about the death.
So that's a little bit of what you can expect this afternoon. And I'm going to post the link is in the chat. So you can go ahead and click on the link to register for today at 2 o'clock. They don't typically record them and send them out just because these are tailored for you and the specific people online. So that's that. And let's jump into contracts. All right. So the point of this is to kind of approach it with a little bit of a different perspective, with real life circumstances, things that you're going through, with a if this, then that mentality. So if you're online, please chat in any questions, comments, circumstances. If it's something that you would like to share, raise your hand, chat in, and what I'll do is I'll give you speaking rights and we can talk about if this, then that, why we would do something different or a strategy that we could use or implement if something happens. And then some of them are basic. Like the first one that we're going to talk about is the buyer and seller line. If you are a buyer or a seller and you're looking at the buyer and seller line, if you see a name, or let's say if you see a trust, if you see a business, if you see something other than an individual's name, then you need to be triggered to look for determining who has the right to sign for this. If it's in a trust, it's almost like a business. It could be John Smith Trust, or the John Smith Trust and John Smith signs. But he may have put it in John Smith Trust, but it's not him that's able to sign. He made it so someone else has to sign for him. You never know how things are created, so you have to dig in. If you see something other than somebody's name at the top of it, then you need to dig a little further. Go to Sunbiz to look up an LLC and see who the registered owners are or managers are of that. If it's a trust, you can ask for documentation of trust paperwork. Title company is going to do it. The title company is going to need trust documents if they have a trust. So if you see that, you need to ask for those things. Also, if you just see a name, look at the bottom and make sure that the person signing is the actual name on the contract. You got to pay attention to little things like that. It's really basic, but it's something that you have to pay attention to. And we so often skip over that. So often that your buyer or seller sometimes may not even pay attention and see that their name is spelled incorrectly. So get a copy of their driver's license, make sure it's spelled correctly and it's the legal name on there. If you see a trust or an LLC, do a little more research to make sure the person signing is an actual person who's able to sign on their behalf. If you have a POA at the bottom, somebody signing power of attorney, POA, then you need to make sure you have power of attorney paperwork. So that's real basics on the buyer and seller information there. This whole section, if any of this is blank, fill it in. The basics. If any of this is blank, fill it in. And double check. Legal description is correct. Tax ID is correct. So if you are looking through this, if any of that is blank, they identify the property tax ID, the property by legal description and tax ID. The address is helpful, but it's something that you really need to do. Craig said it's really embarrassing when you have to go back and get something like that corrected. Yes. Very embarrassing when you think you haven't signed contract, and our back office says, hey, that person cannot sign for this business, or there's a second person that has to sign for this business, or there's that's not the right person for the POA. That's not a power of attorney that conveys, things like that. It's very embarrassing. And also it's very embarrassing if you don't get the address correct and you put the wrong address, you put the wrong legal description and sell the wrong property. So if we screw these things up, it's a big deal. And if we're going to get paid big bucks as a single agent, you better pay attention to those little things, basic stuff. Down here, personal property. We talk about this a lot. if you need to pay attention when you're walking through the property and reading the listing, if there is a water softener, if there is a pool, if there is a mounted TV, if there's built-in things, it says built-ins to convey, but if we want to clarify something, that's where we write it in here. If you see those things, water softener, it's plumbed into the house, just like the water heater. It should convey, in my opinion, but that's my opinion. If you want it to be clear, write it in there. If you don't want any discrepancies, because it says right here, personal property owned, existing on and owned by the seller. If they don't own the water softener, can they convey it? No. So if they have those things, pool equipment, call it out. Net, creepy crawly, any other pool, call out the individual things. If there's things that you want to be certain convey, a shed, we just had this happen. There was a shed. The shed is sitting on the ground. It is not, does not have a foundation. It is not tied down. It's just a shed that sits on the ground. Does it convey? Buyers thought it did. Seller thought it didn't. What should we do? We should have it right here as excluded. So if you see these things, call them out, make them clear, absolutely crystal clear. It's better to have it clear up front, same thing with the name and address, than it is to go back and correct. Over here, let's go here. Purchase price, no big deal. If escrow, this is going to be an opinion, and it'll be a strong one. If your escrow deposit if your initial escrow is was not at least 1%, you need to get a significantly hefty additional deposit. So let's just say initial escrow. I'm on an as-is contract. Give me whatever you want up front, whatever. It's an as-is contract. Buyer can do whatever they want. Let's just get 1% in there, make the buyer happy. But once I prove to you the property is in the condition it needs to be in, you need to prove to me your financing is good, and I want a hefty additional deposit. So if this number is small, we are definitely getting additional deposits. We should be getting additional deposits anytime, unless this is a significantly hefty deposit up front. I'm talking like 40, 50, 60, $100,000. But if they're at a $300,000 home and they're giving you $3,000, you better be asking for at least 10 to 17 more, so you have a good amount in there at least. And if they balk at that, that's okay. It's all right for them to balk at that, but we need to stand a little bit of ground and at least let them understand why we're asking for it. Know that we tried for our seller. So if this is not big, you need to go after a bigger one afterwards. And since right here, we're pretty much just going to be doing within 3 days to have the escrow delivered, but you can change that to 1 if you wanted. It's no big deal. So this number here, line 38C, if this is not filled in, you need to do some digging. You need to know what the buyer's financing is. Read their pre-approval. If this does not match the pre-approval, you need to do some digging. If they're saying we're putting 20% down and they're qualified with a pre-approval that says 5% down, you have a problem. Because the lender said they've got 5% of it, let's say in this case, $300,000, $15,000. They're saying I'm going to put 20% down, $60,000. Big gap. If the numbers don't match, you want to ask some questions. Again, like Craig mentioned right in the beginning, if you have to go back and explain any of these things afterwards as to why it wasn't caught then, it's embarrassing. And we're getting paid a lot of money to do this. So we need to pay attention to these things. So financing expressed as a dollar amount or percentage. If it's blank, get it filled in. I want them obligated to what they say they're going to do. I need you to make a decision and tell me what you're going to do. And if it doesn't match the approval, get it corrected and get a corrected approval or get a corrected contract, because we want to make sure there's rights and obligations here based on what they can actually do. Last line, this balance line number, we see this TBD balance. That's okay. It's not, especially if you know you're going to be negotiating, that number is going to change. It's okay. Should we have it filled in correctly? Yes, but it's okay if you just put in balance. This number doesn't really mean anything. So if this is blank, just write in balance. It's all right. This number literally really does not mean much. It's because it doesn't, this is not a number the buyer's going to have to bring to closing. It's just, I'm putting this much down. I'm putting this much down on my loan. I already have this much down in my escrow deposit. This is what I have to bring as a remainder. No big deal. Time for acceptance. If you are a listing agent and you are countering an offer, you need to understand if you counter this offer and you have your seller sign it, strike through and change some things, if you do that, you are obligated to the counter offer for 2 days. And if they return that counter offer within that 2-day span before you rescind the offer, you are obligated to that and you are under contract. So you better be very aware that your seller is going to be obligated to a counteroffer when you put something in writing and send it back. So just pay attention to that. As a buyer, just know it. If you give them too much time to reply in this market, you are opening up the opportunity for them to get another offer and for them to have yours beat out. So I fully understand a buyer's agent saying, I want an answer in 24 hours. But when we look at the listing, if the listing agent is saying all offers to be presented, no offers will be presented till Sunday, please have time for acceptance till Monday, probably want to do that. You don't have to. You can still put in, I want an answer tomorrow. And you can tell them, I'd like an answer tomorrow and I want my offer to be presented. If the listing agreement is signed by the seller and they specifically directed the listing agent to not present any offers until Sunday evening at 7 p.m., your offer does not have to be presented. And your offer will expire and you will not have a valid offer that will be executable at the time of presentation on Sunday evening. So pay attention to time for acceptance in the listing. Make sure that you're looking in the realtor remarks. Call the listing agent. You should have a conversation with every single one of them if you're writing an offer, and pay attention to these dates. And know as a seller, if you sign a counter offer and send it back, you're obligated to that counter offer for 2 days. Closing date. All right, so we're going to play two things, line 52 and line 87. Closing date and loan approval date. These two things you need to pay very close attention to. If your closing date is 30 days and you go to the second page for the financing and your loan approval is 30 days, you have a problem as a listing agent. As a buyer's agent, you're fine. And if you can get that buy, that's fine. You just gave your buyer protection. My closing date will be in 30 days. I have right up until the if left blank 30-day time frame to get my loan approval. And if I get denied my loan on the very last day of the closing date, my buyer's protected. But as a listing agent, if your closing date is the same date as your loan approval date, or your loan approval date is after your closing date, you have a problem. So what you need to do when you get an offer is you need to pay attention to the closing date and pay attention to the loan approval period. And you need to have the strength to go to the buyer's agent and say, unfortunately, we won't be able to accept your offer because your closing date is 30 days and your loan approval is 30 days. My seller will require minimum 3 to 5 days. You need 3 days before to get the CD out. So the absolute minimum you should ever have is 3 days prior to closing to have loan approval. That would be the absolute minimum. You probably want to have it. My personal opinion, I like to have 5 days to 10 days. So that 5 to 10 day period should be enough time for your seller to solidify their moving, make sure they get everything packed up and moved out, and everything is done in a timely fashion. So if your closing date and your loan approval date coincide, your direction should be, look, one of two things: either move the closing date out or move the loan approval date up. That simple. Either way, you have a 30-day closing, we need 21-day loan approval. Oh, my lender can't do that. Well, great, then put a longer closing. Well, I mean, your seller said they want to close as soon as possible. Yes, we want to close as soon as possible, which means we need a buyer ready, willing, and able to close as soon as possible. And if you do a 30-day closing and you have a 30-day loan approval guaranteed that we're closing, we don't know. We're going right up to that date. So we want a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy and close. So have the strength to do that. If your loan approval and your closing date are too close together, tell them, move the closing date back or move the loan approval up. And we need to make sure that we are doing that. I usually write in 10 days less than the closing date for loan approval. Absolutely. That's a very, very good practice. And either one is fine. Do a 40-day closing and a 30-day loan approval. Most lenders. So here's the other thing. If your closing date is 30 days as a listing agent or even a buyer, when you're writing this contract, your closing date, call the lender. Call the lender and find out. I still talk to plenty of people that we're going over a contract they're going to submit. Can the lender close in 30 days? I see you wrote a 30-day closing. Can the lender close in 30 days? Well, I don't know. You didn't ask? So you just obligated your buyer to a 30-day closing in a contract that they have an obligation to close within 30 days, and you didn't verify with the lender. Well, if we need an extension, we'll just get an extension. That's a pretty brazen statement and a pretty flippant statement to say, we'll just get an extension. In a legally binding contract in a seller's market where sellers have multiple offers and multiple people waiting for this property and may already have a backup or somebody right in the wings waiting, and you're just going to say, we'll just ask for an extension. What if the seller doesn't grant it? They don't have to. Your buyer's right and obligation is to close on the date you put on the contract. The seller's rights and obligations are to close on the day you put on the contract. You just expecting them to extend is an expectation. That's all that is. They don't have to, and in this market, sometimes they may not do. And don't try to tell me, well, I mean, this is the smartest thing. I mean, we only need 3 more days or 5 more days or 7 more days. It'll take that long to go. You're not the seller. These sellers have a lot of emotion vested in this home, and you never know what's happening on the other side. You're taking it from just a very basic stance that it's just 7 days. To them, it might be way more than that. So you really need to pay attention to your loan approval date, your closing dates, and make sure that they're lining up. And if they do not line up correctly, make the adjustment. And you really need to make sure with your buyer that your lender can close on time. A lot of the bigger banks like Chase, Bank of America, even Navy Federal, some of them will not guarantee a closing shorter than 45 days. They've done it, but they won't guarantee it. So if you write a contract with a 30-day closing, they're going to kick it back and tell you, we can't guarantee that date. We'll shoot for it, but we can't guarantee it. So you have to pay attention when this closing date is filled in. Going through some blanks here. If you have a lease, if you have a currently leased property that you are listing, or you have a buyer buying a property that's there's a current tenant in it, this becomes very important. This box, check if property is subject to lease. If you do not check that as a listing agent and you have a tenant in place that will extend past the closing date and you don't check that, you've just obligated your seller to sell the property and deliver occupancy at closing. They can't deliver occupancy at closing. You have a lease, and your seller could be in breach of contract. So as a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, be very aware if there's a lease in place and be aware of what the rights are. If you have a tenant in there, get all the documents up front. Get the lease, get a letter from the tenant stating whatever they've been there, how long they've been there, basically in a form of a similar to an estoppel, because they can do that. The buyer has a right to do that if numbers don't match up. So get a lease, get a copy of it, have it ready. Be able to provide that information to the buyer as a listing agent. And as a buyer's agent, make sure you get those things. So know that if there is a tenant in place, this must be done, and pay attention to that. If either box may assign and be released, if that box is checked, better make sure you understand that that buyer can transfer that contract rights to anybody else, and you do not have the right to verify their approval. May assign and be released. I can get a contract, check may assign and be released, and I can assign that contract to anybody that I want, whether they're qualified or not, and I'm released of all obligations. I have no obligations to this contract anymore. So that's what that means. That's why being released from liability is an issue. May assign and not be released, that's fine. Hey, you can assign it to whoever you want, but you're still responsible. So if this first box is checked, you may want to do a little bit of digging and get that changed, because you never know who they may assign it to. Never know what's going to happen. And then there's no liability on their end. These two boxes here. So these blanks, these boxes, if box A is checked, it says buyer will pay cash for the purchase of the property at closing and there's no financing contingency. If that is checked, that does not mean the buyer has to pay cash. Because it says if they obtain a loan for any part of the purchase, there's no any terms and conditions imposed by the lender shall not affect or extend their obligations. So there's no financing protection if they check this box. So it says buyer will pay cash, but it goes on further to say if they get a loan. So understand that this box does not necessarily mean it's a cash deal and they're not getting a loan. What we need to say is this box removes the buyer's financing protections and they will not have a contingency for getting a satisfactory loan. So that's what that really means to you as a listing agent, and for you as a buyer's agent. If you're looking to make your offer stronger and you've got a really solid buyer that's already been approved and already ready to go, and the buyer is willing to do it and the lender is really satisfied with the full file, you can check that box that there is no financing contingency. We're already approved, we're ready to go. We're willing to make our escrow deposit at risk if we don't close after the inspection period. That's possible. So if this is checked, know that it does not mean necessarily that it's a cash deal. The buyer can get a loan, they have no protection. If this box is checked, right here, there's a contract is contingent upon buyer obtaining approval of, make sure you have a loan, which type of loan checked. Make sure you pay attention to that. So make sure you see that. And then again, like we talked about with loan approval date, make sure that if this is 30 days, that your closing date is at least 3 to 5 days after that, at the very minimum, but probably you want a 10-day gap between the two to make it safe. You can always move the closing date up once the loan approval is got it, once you have it, if you really want to. Hey, work to get loan approval. I understand you want the protection. I understand you want 30 days and we'll do a 40-day closing. Work to get your loan approval, get it done in 21 days, and we'll move the closing date up once we have it clear to close and you deliver loan approval and get your CD. We'll move it up. That's fine. I get it, but I want a gap in between. We need to have that gap so that your seller now has the power to decide when they're going to be out, how they're going to move, and how that's going to work. If this box right here, this at an initial interest rate not to exceed, if this box is checked, just know you want to be aware of what the market rates are, because if this is much higher than the market rate, you basically just gave this buyer a free out of the contract. Like if market rate is 3% and somebody writes, I want to get this at a rate not to exceed 5%, or at a rate not to exceed 2% if they have it much lower. So if they have a rate not to exceed 2%, you just gave them a free out of the contract. Because even if they got approved at a market rate interest rate, if they wrote in 2% here and market rate is 3%, they could cancel the contract right up until loan approval, even if they're approved for their loan. Because this says right here, it cannot exceed 2%. If it exceeds 2%, they have the right to cancel. This is part of the contingency. So if this is filled in, make sure you understand and talk to their lender about the type of loan they're getting, what the interest rate is, why is it that much lower? Is that really going to be the rate? If it's higher than that, make sure you understand some of that. We really got to dig into that one if there's something filled in. Most times you're going to see it's just left blank. But I understand some people want to fill that in to make sure the buyer's protected, because if the interest rates go up, they may not be able to buy. Again, another bit of not a red flag, but we need to be diligent here. If they write something in there, are their qualifications that tight that if the interest rates change over the next 30 days, they may not be able to buy? So if this is filled in, light bulb needs to go off. You need to do some more digging and research and understand exactly why they did that, because you may not have a buyer that's overly qualified, because if things shift or change, they may not be able to buy. Buyer shall make mortgage loan application. Pay attention here. Just make sure that it's within a time frame. Most of the time, they'll already have done that, or they'll be getting it done shortly. So you just don't want a long time frame here. Next blanks. Line 126, closing costs, title insurance, costs to be paid by the seller. Line 131, right here. This is this blank right here for other. Pay attention. If there is anything written in on here, this is an obligation to the seller to pay whatever is written on there. We've had to pay $6,000 before because somebody wrote in there in small lettering. I mean, it was readable. It wasn't, they weren't hiding it. It wasn't like tiny, tiny, tiny. It was, it was about the same size as the rest of the print, a little bit smaller. Seller to pay $6,000 towards buyer's closing costs. Wrote in right here. We didn't catch it. The seller didn't catch it. The closing date came and the seller says, what the hell is this? We go and say, hey, what the heck is this? Oh, it's on the contract. No, it wasn't. It wasn't in additional terms. I didn't see it anywhere. Come back here, clear as day. Seller to pay $6,000. If there's anything on this line as a listing agent, pay attention. Make sure you're diligent about what's going on here. This is a key. This will get you in trouble if you don't pay attention to it. Same thing here. Others, if you're a buyer's agent, there's really not too much to pay too much attention to here. A lot of times you'll see a transaction fee written on here. So just if you're the buyer's agent, make sure if you didn't write anything in there and something's written in there, the seller's saying that your buyer is paying for this. So you got to pay attention to this line to make sure that's that. Title evidence. Little sneaky things here. This is where Contract Ninja, Black Belt, and contracts come into play. This date. This says if it's a loan, 15 days prior to closing. If it's cash, 5 days prior to closing. The title company, so out of your hands, out of the seller's hands, out of the buyer's hands, and the buyer's agent's hands, the title company will deliver a title commitment within that time frame. So if you're doing a 21-day closing, 21-day closing because you have a solid buyer with financing, and this says 15 days prior to closing, as a seller, you may want to change that and actually write a different date in, because if your title company does not deliver title commitment with a 21-day closing in 6 days, so 6 days after being under contract, if they don't deliver a title commitment, your seller will be in breach for not doing that. Or it hasn't been done and the buyer will be able to cancel. So you can have, hey, I'm going to waive my financing contingency. I'll waive my loan. I'll waive my inspection period as a buyer, but this is, will close in 21 days. Day 7 comes and the buyer cancels because they didn't get the title commitment within the timeline that's here. Buyer can do that if they don't like what the title commitment says, because they have 5 days to review it once they do receive it. So if they don't get it within that timeline, they could potentially cancel here and there would be a breach. So they have this timeline to do that. So pay attention to these dates. If you have shorter closing dates on a finance loan, you may want to push this back if you're the seller's agent and not leave this at 15. Because if you leave it at 15, there's an obligation to have it done within 6 days on like a 21-day closing. And if you have a shorter closing, it's even shorter than that. So you probably want to pay attention to this. If you have a loan that's doing, you want to make sure you change this date and push it out a little bit so that the title company has time to do their job. And if you need to know a time frame, call and ask. How long is it going to take you to get the title commitment out to the buyer? So pay attention. Here, these are pretty basic. Couple little things to pay attention to. Does Paramount do that for us, or do we need to get that over to the other agents? Paramount will do that for you. When they get a title commitment, they will send you and your client the title commitment, and they will send the other agent and their client the title commitment. They typically will not put them on the same email chain because they're not going to give you or the other agent either or's client's email address by putting it on there, but they will send that out. And they're usually really good about doing that. But again, you need to pay attention. And if you have a shorter time frame that it needs to be done in, call and ask if they can get it done. Usually what we're seeing a lot of, whether in Hillsborough, Pinellas, you see this seller shall designate closing agent. In Manatee, Sarasota County, sometimes you'll see more of the buyer to designate, but seller to designate closing agent and pay for owner's policy. Just know that if you're the buyer's agent and you check this box, Buyer shall designate closing agent and pay for owner's policy and charges for closing services. So here's what you want to make sure they understand. The fees are a little bit higher than what's on the cost estimator. So for every time a buyer or seller closes, the buyer pays a closing fee, the seller pays a closing fee to the title company. That's outside of the title charges. So if it's the buyer to pick and pay for title, the buyer is paying for the title insurance, $5.75 per $1,000. And then there's also a closing fee that the title company charges the buyer and the seller. So if the buyer checks this box, buyer shall designate closing agent and pay for owner's policy and charges for closing services, they're paying the closing fee for the seller too, which is an additional $350 to $550. I've seen them as high as $650 and $750 for a closing fee. So just the closing fee the title company charges to each party just to do the closing. Hey, this is the fee that we charge you to close this file, buyer and seller. If the buyer checks this box, the buyer is paying for that closing fee as well. So they're paying their own closing fee plus the buyer's closing fee, plus the seller's closing fee. So it's an additional fee on top of what you see in our seller's closing cost estimator. Do you want to know what that cost is going to be? Reach out to the title company, get a net sheet. So if you are going to obligate your buyer to pay for the title fees, if you are going to do this, make sure they understand this is what the title insurance is going to cost, and then there's closing fees associated with it, and you'll be responsible for both parties' closing fees because you're saying I'm going to pay for the owner's policy and charges related to closing. So that's an additional fee. And look, when you're closing on a property, if numbers get tight or anything, some people are very, very, very diligent about numbers. They're going to go through and they're going to find every single little thing. And if you didn't tell them about that $350 to $650 closing fee, and they felt they should have known that, and they get upset with it, you're going to have an issue. So just make sure it's called out. It's not just what's on our closing cost estimator. There's an additional closing fee. Get it from the title company, get a net sheet. So that's that. If you're selling a property in Miami-Dade or Broward County, there's a different policy there. It's just it's more of like the buyer pick and pay, and there's some different title policies here, so just pay attention to that if you're selling anything there. Statement here, if you're selling something down there, just refer it. Get an agent who knows the area, let them handle it because they know little things like this that you don't know that you could potentially screw up and create a problem. So make sure you just refer that out. If your seller has a survey, get it up front, get it at the preview, get it at the listing presentation so you have it. And if you're going to order warranties or anything, for us as a buyer or a seller's agent, if you are ordering a warranty, you need to have the Global Home USA warranty application filled in. Check what warranty they want, have the buyer or seller sign it, and then submit that to the back office. So if you do those things, if you take the Global Home warranty application, your buyer chooses what they want, add on any coverage, sign it, and submit it to the back office, they're going to place the order for the warranty. They get an invoice that says, this is the invoice number. We're paying this much for the warranty. This is the policy we want. Please give this to the title company so they could add it to the settlement statement. And then you send that to title. Now title knows where to send the payment for the warranty, and they have an invoice to go with it. They mail those payments off. So if you are doing this, get the application completed and submit it to the back office. They will send you documentation to send to title. If you have a buyer who picks and pays title, can you strike through and have seller pay his own title fees, like buyer pick and pay, but seller to pay his or own like closing fee? Yes, you can do that. And what you would do is you would cross through the second part of and charges for closing services related to buyer's lender policy, endorsements, and loan closing or anything. You can just cross through that, or the and charges, the pay for owner's policy, and cross through from that and all the way out. Say, look, I'm not paying for your closing fee, or just write it in additional terms. Buyer to pay for owner's policy, seller to cover their own closing fee charged by the title company. Write something in like that. But yeah, you can do that. I've seen people do that, cross out the second portion of the and charges to make sure that they don't have to pay that. All right. Big. Tiny box, big issues. Special assessments. If there are special assessments that are levied or pending special assessments, and they have been allocated to be paid in installments, these boxes here are what's going to dictate who has to do what by when. This says, the first one, this is the fair way to do it. This is the easiest way I can explain it. This is the fair way to do it. Look, Mr. Seller lives in this property. 2 months ago, a year ago, 6 months ago, they levied a special assessment of $1,200 for the year for redoing sidewalks, paving a road, street lights, whatever it is. They levied a $1,200 assessment for the year, and it can be paid in installments of $100 a month. It's been 6 months into the payments. The seller's paid 6 months worth of payments, $600. We close in month 7. This says, checking box A. If box A is checked, the seller will pay the portion that they own the property up until the closing date, and we will prorate the rest of it, and the buyer will pay for the portion when they own the property. My seller has had quiet enjoyment of the property and the special assessment, whatever it was levied for. They enjoyed it. They paid for it while they were there. The buyer will pay for their portion and have quiet enjoyment of the update until in perpetuity until they leave or close. So it's just a fair way to do it because the buyer's going to get to enjoy it. The seller got to enjoy their portion of it. That's a fair way. That's an assessment. Box B says the assessment will be paid in full. So if box B is checked, just know that your seller could be obligated to a special assessment that you may not have known about, that they may have not known about or forgot about. What we had happen, we had some issues where title companies were looking at there's a water, it says on there a water assessment in Hillsborough County. There's a water special assessment that's in the non-ad valorem taxes in parts of Hillsborough County. And title companies were looking at that. It's not a special assessment deemed this way. It's attached to every property, but some title companies were saying this needs to be paid off in full, and it's like $4,000 left that needs to be paid off, and the seller has to pay it if box B was checked. So again, you may not have known it. You may not have seen it. In this case, there was no special assessments that we were aware of. We could not find anything. There was no notifications. The title company deemed that that was a special assessment, and we had to fight it. They would not budge, and we ended up having to pay that as well. So if box B is checked, you better be damn sure that there's nothing and be absolutely positive, because if not, and we didn't call it out and we didn't fight to get that changed, we could potentially be responsible, because the seller's going to be pissed if we didn't tell them and say, hey, well, you could end up paying this, but yeah, well, let's take a gamble. Not a good play. So this one, section D, flood zone. If your property is in a flood zone, if property is in a special flood hazard area or Coastal Barrier Resource Act designated area or otherwise protected, and the lowest floor elevation for the building and or flood insurance rating purposes is below minimum flood elevation. So if it's in a special flood hazard area and the lowest floor is lower than the minimum flood elevation, or it's ineligible for flood insurance, the buyer will be able to cancel this contract. That's basically what this says within this timeline. This 20, if left blank, 20 days. So just know, if you have a property in a flood zone that meets these requirements, if you don't change this, you are giving the buyer 20 days to back out. And if you're a buyer's agent, if it's in a flood zone and you don't want to add a flood insurance addendum by saying that, hey, we need to verify flood insurance doesn't exceed this amount, this right here gives you 20 days if these terms are met, if it's in a special flood hazard area and the base flood elevation is below, which is why as a listing agent, we get the elevation certificate and a copy of the seller's flood insurance premium, attach it to the listing or have it handy and send it off whenever you have a property in a flood zone. And then you have the ability to write 0 here. Look, you have an as-is contract. You've got 7 days to determine that the property's in the condition you need it to be, well, so you can determine if you're moving forward. 7 days, 10 days, whatever we put in there for the as-is inspection period. I gave you an elevation certificate and I gave you a copy of my seller's flood insurance premium. 7 to 10 days is more than enough for you to determine what your flood insurance is going to be. I'm crossing through that because I don't want, or I'm just going to put in 7 days or 10 days, just mirror whatever the inspection period is and put that in there. You have all the information you need. That's more than enough time for you to determine if you want to move forward. You're not going to drag me along for 20 days. So if you're in a flood zone and these terms are met, pay attention to this date. And if you're a buyer's agent, pay attention, and you could potentially give your buyer a little more protection. Or you add in a flood insurance addendum or an insurance addendum that says that if the insurance premium exceeds this amount, the buyer can cancel within this time frame. Next, focusing on blanks. Property inspection. We're looking at the as-is inspection period. Buyer shall have blank days after effective day to which to have such inspections of the property performed. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion, most important terms here, sole discretion. If you accept an as-is contract, you are literally giving the buyer the right to do whatever they want within the inspection period. Sole discretion. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to do an inspection. I can have my Uncle Ray come down and walk through the property with me and tell me it's a POS and I need to cancel the contract, and I would be within my rights to do it. I do not have to have a licensed person do the inspection. It does not say if I want repairs what the timelines are going to be for when I ask for them, when you have to respond to them, how long that time frame can be, how do we get estimates, how do we determine what happens if the inspection period comes to an end and we still haven't come to terms on repairs. It doesn't say any of that. So if you have an as-is inspection, as-is contract with an as-is inspection period, as a buyer's agent, your buyers, in their sole discretion, their only job is to cancel the contract or to move forward. That's their only right and obligation in this contract. You can do other things, but the only thing covered by the contract is cancel the contract or buy the home. That's it. As a seller's agent, look, we all want deals to close, but as a seller's agent, if you accept an as-is contract, just know that the seller understands fully. If you accept an as-is contract, the seller understands fully the buyer can do whatever they want during this time frame, does not have to do an inspection. They're probably going to ask for repairs anyway. The contract doesn't cover any of that, but they're probably going to do it. They don't have any rights or obligations, but they can do it. You know, it's not covered by that. But if they ask for repairs on the last day of the inspection period, let's just say today's the last day of my inspection period. This afternoon at 4 o'clock, I get a request for repairs and I get it in my email. I don't see it till 7 o'clock when I sit down at the computer and start pulling it up. I call the seller and I say, hey, Mr. Seller, they're asking for some repairs. Inspection period's up today. What do you want to do? I don't know. I need to talk to my contractor to see what I can do. If I can do those, what it'll cost. Okay, let me know. Guess what? Tomorrow comes. The buyer is outside of their inspection period. But I asked for repairs. I performed within the confines of no, you didn't. The confines of the contract says your buyer is buying the home or canceling. That's it. Not asking for repairs, not waiting for me to reply. It doesn't say how long I have to reply. It just says you will cancel by today. And if you do not, you're buying the home and your money's at risk. That's it. So it's in our best interest to try to communicate. But if they don't have any other protection written in or clarified, as a buyer's agent, if you're on the last day of your inspection period, that's why our inspection clause is key on an as-is, informational purposes only. Absolutely, Lauren. So if you accept an as-is contract, we have that clause you can add into the additional terms. Buyer acknowledges that buyer's inspection and inspection period is for buyer's informational purposes only. Any request for repairs, or reduction in price shall be considered a reopening of negotiations, and the seller reserves the right to cancel this contract. So at that point, when they request repairs as a buyer's agent, you're all going to do it. I've seen you all do it. If you're going to request repairs during the inspection period on an as-is contract, if you are going to do that and it's the last day of your inspection period, what does it say the rights are? Buyer may terminate this contract by delivering written notice of such election to seller prior to expiration. That's their job. So if you request repairs and it's the last day of your inspection period, this says if you don't notify them in writing that you're canceling, your money will be at risk and that inspection period is lapsed. So you can write into that request, write it on an addendum, seller shall repair this, this, or this. And if you're going to do this and it's the very last day or coming near the end of it, right at the bottom, if seller is unwilling to accommodate this request, please let this serve as buyer's written notice of intent to cancel. Because you have to deliver written notice. It says you will deliver written notice. So yes, if you're not willing to accommodate, please also let this serve as buyer's written notice of intent to cancel. That way you've delivered your written notice, but your buyer has to understand. If you deliver that, you're telling them you're canceling if they don't do it. And if the seller wants to cancel, you just kind of open that can of worms on them. So they have, if this is going to give you a little more power and kind of put your buyer in their place. Look, if I do that and I request these repairs, since we're late in this period, I need to add this in as well. Otherwise, if they don't reply today, your money's at risk. The seller can literally just sit there and say, not covered by the contract. I'm not replying to that because it doesn't say I have to, and it doesn't tell me any rights or obligations. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to sit and wait till tomorrow comes and this buyer is screwed and they're within their rights. So as a buyer's agent, you want to make sure that in that last period you put there and deliver that notice with the written notice of intent to cancel on that addendum as well. Otherwise, your buyer is going to be put at risk. Property maintenance, we're going to talk about this. If you have a pool, if you have a lawn, they all still need to be updated and need to be upkept. You can't just stop mowing your lawn and paying your pool guy to do your pool. You need to continue to maintain these things. So if you have that, you have to make sure you're doing that. So there's no other blanks until the very last page. So again, we're focusing on the blanks today with more of a if this, then that. So we're just kind of going over certain circumstances, what you need to pay attention to and things to top of mind. Page 19 under page 11 under the addenda, section 19. If you have any addenda and any of these boxes are checked, what this says is the following additional terms are included in the attached addenda or riders and incorporated into this contract. So let's just say you have box B checked and you send it over, but you didn't send over the homeowners association. If you check any of these boxes, that is your trigger to go add the addendum and make sure that it's signed, or get it from the listing if you're a buyer writing an offer. Get it from the listing if it's attached and get it signed by the buyer. So you have to pay attention to what you check here. If you check anything, make sure you include it. Other over here. If this box is checked, make sure something's written in here. If they check other and don't write anything in here, what is supposed to go? It says there's something else that's supposed to be part of this contract. I don't know what it is. Another thing, the property disclosure does not need to be made part of the contract. The contract says that the seller has disclosed anything they know. There's a line in the contract that says that. The contract covers that. Seller has disclosed anything they know that materially affects the value of the property. That's what it says. You don't need to add in here the seller's property disclosure. It's just going to potentially create issues. You don't need to attach it, but you want to get it signed by all parties. So it doesn't need to be part of the contract. Additional terms, if you are representing a buyer, make sure that you click on additional terms and in dot loop, go up to the top and there's the clauses section. If you are representing a buyer, make sure you add the 325 transaction fee language. Be certain that you do that. because if you don't, you will be responsible for paying that. So if you represent a buyer, every buyer contract should have the additional terms here, buyer only transaction fee. Also, as Lauren stated, the as is verbiage that we add is specifically as a seller. If you're a buyer writing an as is contract, I don't want to add that verbiage. I don't want to put that in, giving the seller the right to cancel my contract if I do these things. So if you're a seller, you want the as is inspection verbiage, but as a buyer, you do not. So if you are writing an as is contract as a buyer's agent, put the buyer's transaction fee here, and you do not want to add the as is inspection verbiage because it will give the seller the right to cancel this contract. If you are the agent, just make sure you fill this in, because it says these are the brokers that are allowed to get paid. That's what the contract says. These are the ones associated with this contract that are allowed to be paid. All right, that's basically it. Some of the main points with, certain circumstances, what you want to look for and do. Do you have any questions, comments? If you need to raise your hand, I can add you and give you a voice and you could speak. We could discuss. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll give you just a few minutes to go over that. Ask anything that you want. But those are the if this, then that. If these things are done, pay attention to it, just to give you some more points to look at. If you are a listing agent and you are accepting a contract, we also have in the additional terms and in the clauses, there is appraisal verbiage. The same place you get your buyer only transaction fee. As a buyer's agent, if you're choosing to waive an appraisal contingency or pay a certain amount over the appraisal contingency or over the contract price for the appraisal, you have the ability to add that. That's in the additional terms. So you would be in the additional terms and you would click in the additional terms, and at the top of the page in dot loop, there's a little box for clauses and it says buyer agrees to pay X amount of dollars over the appraised value. And it also says, or buyer, this contract is not contingent upon an appraisal. Buyer agrees to pay the contract price regardless. So if you're writing an offer and your buyer has the funds and is willing to do that, you want to call that out. And you want to put that in these additional terms. So pay attention to those things. And that's basically it. We're right up about 9:30. There's no other questions. You guys have an awesome day. The chat. I had the link for the Tony Robbins event is in there. That's at 2:00. So you can click the register there and you'll get a link because it's going to be on Zoom. If you want to come into the office, I'm going to put it up on the screen up here, but please bring a laptop or a phone so you can log into Zoom as well. When you log into Zoom, they're going to be able to see that you are there and that they'll be able to offer you the discount on any of their courses. They'll give you the free course that they're going to give you, and they'll be able to communicate with you. Thank you so much for the birthday wishes. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everybody. I hope you guys have an awesome day. Happy Wednesday, and we will talk soon.